Good afternoon, guys. How's it going?
Good. How are you?
Good.
How
We're
are you?
back here, the Power of Podcast, Research Director Inc.'s newest podcast, our first and only podcast so far. And we are circling back to a topic that is very hot right now. It's been hot for a while. Nielsen's new 3-minute rule. The last episode, I had Mark and Steve. I have them again with me today. Thanks for coming on, guys. We discussed what this was going to look like when the new 3-minute rule went into effect starting in January. Obviously, now we're in March. The rule has been in effect, and we have the January data that's come out recently. Everybody's diving into it, trying to see what does this all mean. Still early, right, because we only have the one book so far to look at, but we thought this was a great time to come back on, get into some of the things that we're seeing. Mark and Steve have really gotten creative with how they're looking at the data here. We have a new blog that's just come out in Radio Inc. That Steve has written. And so I want to talk a little bit about that blog and some of the initial observations that you guys wanted to call out and make sure people were aware of. So I guess I'll start with you, Steve. What are some of the first things that you looked at when the data was released?
Well, a couple things first. All props to Mark because he did all the heavy lifting on this.
That's right. That's right.
The king of the pivot table in Excel. I just looked at what he came out with. He's the one that did all the work. And also big kudos to our friends at X Trends, which is where we got all the data from. Looking at 48 of the 49 PPM markets and over 4,400 radio stations was kind of a Herculean task. What we looked at for this particular article in Radio Inc., we just wanted to look at some demos and day parts. So we took 2554, 18 to 34, 18 to 49, and 3564, and then all the major day parts, total week, mornings, et cetera, et cetera. And we wanted to see what the percent change overall in all PPM markets were for AQH persons, CUME, and TSL or AWTE, depending on what you prefer. So that's kind of sets up the whole thing. It's a massive amount of data, and it revealed that everything was up. I don't think we saw, and this is from holiday of January, nothing went down. The two of the bigger takeaways that for me were the biggest increase for AQH was morning drive. Now, is that seasonal? Is that 3-minute? It's hard to say. And the other one was that if you start breaking it down in the chart that Mark created, that if you start, there's been that talk out there. Well, it's clearly benefiting younger demos. Not clearly. I mean, if you look at the percent changes on a lot of these things, they're all in a pretty narrow band. So I think early on, holiday of January, I don't think anyone can make a definitive statement that, well, younger demos, that's the answer.
That was sort of speculated, right? Is that what you're referring to? That initially it was thought that it would be the younger demos where we would see the biggest difference.
Yeah, and there have been a few people out there writing that still. I haven't. To me, if you're looking at, I'm just looking at my own screen here. But if you're looking at 18 to 49 total week, AQH was up 36.9%. For 2554, it was up 36%. And for 3564, it was up 34%. It's not exactly a wide variety there.
Yeah.
I mean, you're talking, a range of what, less than 3 percentage points? That to me is not a compelling story to say that, yes, definitely, it's all going on.
Well, is this another case where we do need to wait? Like, we might be able to make more sense of it once we have more data for the next couple months, or you still think it's not really going to make a difference necessarily?
Don't know. I mean, we can't.
I mean, the big change was holiday to January. If we do a comparison, let's say Jan to Jan 25 to Jan 24, Feb 25 to Feb 24, gets a little more challenging to match up stations to calculate all these percent changes, call letter changes, also formats change. But the big impact is where we're seeing it right now, looking at it this way, from holiday to January. Again, I know there's a lot of people debating what's the best way to look at this. And I think in the Radio Inc. webinar last week, even Mike McVeigh mentioned that the best way would have been looking at the January 2025 with a 5-minute rule versus January 2025 with a 3-minute rule. But that data, I don't know if it exists, doesn't seem to be forthcoming. So there's no way to really know apples to apples. So we have a lot of noise when we're analyzing this data. You know, we have local market influences, weather things. In Philadelphia, you'll see changes that happen because they're in the Super Bowl and they won.
Right. The time of it.
You know, different markets have different reasons why different stations went up and down. We looked at 4,400 stations, hoping to use big data basically to average all of that stuff out.
Yeah, and I think you use this as a comparison, right? You sit there and go, okay, I'm an 18 of 49 station, and I see over the 48 of the 49 PPM markets, AQH was up about a little over a third. How did I do in my demo? Was I up a third? Was I up a quarter? Was I up more than a third? You know, again, it's only 1 month, but it really matters what's happening in your market. I mean, I've looked at some of our client markets, and I've seen discrete demo cells lose TSL from holiday to January. Like Med 18 to 24 went down in one market I looked at.
And you're talking PUM there, not an average station, right?
Right, yeah, PUM. Sorry, you're right, Mark. PUM. Yeah, it was PUM. But I mean, that's every market's different. To me, this is an initial guidepost. Mm-hmm. A reference point. I mean, look, the numbers are right. It came out of X Trends. Mark, bench tested all the stuff he did in the pivot tables. So we're very confident that the math is correct. So I mean, it's something to look at and just say, okay, great. So mornings were up more than any other day part. And is that because of 3 minutes? Is that because of holiday to January? I mean, there's just so many variables here. I mean, we kind of talked about it in the Radio Inc. webinar. It's like, yeah. Did you lose a household? Did you gain a household? Right? It's one part of the puzzle overall, and I think that the fact that we're seeing everything elevated at the end of the day is great for radio, right? Yes, we love it. AQH is up, Hume is up. I'll be honest, in Mark's data, Hume was up more on average than I expected it to be. But that's a good thing, and that's, it could be that you're getting lighter, chances are if your Hume went up, chances are you picked up light listeners, right?
Yeah. You mentioned that earlier, Mark, right? That people weren't expecting necessarily that Hume would be one of the more affected because that would mean that you have new people coming in that are light listeners.
Now, that said, when I did the radio roundup, and again, it's only the top 20 markets, I saw Hume go up, market-wide Hume go up on a 6+ basis. But it was what we sort of expect from holiday to January. And it was generally somewhere between I think the biggest market I saw was 5.5 or 6%. So as far as bringing new people to radio, we may not be doing that. We're just doing a better job of measuring the people that are already here.
Right. And that's really the whole idea behind this whole 3-minute rule, right? And we keep saying that these aren't new people necessarily. Yeah. They're really not. They've always been there. Now we're shining the light on it, though, where it wasn't before.
Right. It's not just new people. It's not new listening either. The listening was already there. It's just now radio is getting credit for it. Yeah. It's real listening. It's not manufactured.
No, it's always been there. The question is, what do you do with it from both a sales and a programming standpoint? And I think everybody should be thinking about what we do with this, but nobody should be making any conclusions until we have, at least to me, 3 months worth of data where we can start seeing some normalization between year to year and stuff. But if at nothing else, this rule change shows radio is stronger than we were being given credit for in the past, and that's a great thing.
Absolutely.
Well, and especially if you're talking on the sales side, mm-hmm. If you're used to using a 3-book average, remember now, a 3-book average that ends with January has 2 months, whether it's December and holiday, or whether it's November and December, add it to January. 2 of the months still had the 5-minute rule. Nobody went back and recalculated that.
Right.
So the 3-minute rule is in effect for only 1/3 of that. When February rolls in, it'll be in effect for 2/3 of that. And then it's not until when March comes in that you'll have a multi-book average, a 3-book average. That's all based on the 3-minute rule.
Steve, let's go back to something that we talked about, I think, offline, but not quite here yet. The reason that, when you and Mark were looking at the numbers here and deciding what we wanted to focus on, why you guys decided not to look at like a January to January, for instance. Like what prompted that?
Well, we also have format data in there, which we'll roll out later. And the big problem there is Mark has stated, is that you got to then start factoring in format changes, right? And call letter changes and things like that. So if, assuming that, let's say the database has 700 in January 25 has 750 CHRs, and it only had 730, it starts getting, it gets tougher on a format to format basis. I think demos are, to me, we all live and die by demos, right? I think they're important.
Yeah, it sounds like there's no perfect way necessarily to do this, right? We're just trying to come up with the best of what we've got, so especially so far.
Yeah, well, and I think it's important that we do these comparisons and look at them to see what the changes are. Again, it's a guidepost. It's just another thing to keep an eye on to see how it progresses. I mean, let's take the other way. Let's say Nielsen implements this rule and everything went down. What would we have said then? I mean, that didn't happen. So, my takeaway is that while there's no clear pattern and things tend to be kind of all over the map, this is still positive. Although when you did the demos, it was interesting, right? Morning, clearly bigger gains in mornings, not bigger gains at night.
Right, and you mentioned it earlier, is that just because something was different from holiday to January,
right,
meaning less listening in morning, more in holiday, and more listening in morning in January, or is it because of the 3-minute rule, meaning for some reason there are more 3 and 4 minute entries in morning drive
right,
than there are in the other day parts. That's the core explanation for these percent changes. I mean, if it's up 63%, the AQH in morning drive for persons 1834 is up, the average station is up 63%, and that averages, again, 4,400 stations. We did filter out the stations less than a 1 share,
right,
because the smaller stations had huge percent changes, right? If you go from 100 to 200 or 100 to 500, that's a huge percent change. We wanted to filter those out because that made a lot more noise. But I think what surprised me when I think back to Nielsen's initial reveal of their results, they showed very narrow ranges of difference in day parts, in markets, in demos. When Steve and I looked at the data, it was much wider. The variation was much wider across those 4,400 stations, across the day parts and the demos. And of course, what you're doing there is you're looking at individual stations, again, that have all of these individual scenarios that could cause their ratings to change. We're also not looking, remember what Nielsen did back then is they went from May 5-minute to May 3-minute. So that was apples to apples. This is holiday to January. It's not apples to apples.
Well, also too, what we put out there was the average of all the percentages, right?
Right.
So again, we're looking at, we were just looking at some of the data. I mean, you have a station that goes from 200, one station goes from 900 to 1900, massive increase in that demo in that day part. Well, the station next to them went from 900 to 1000. So you average those two together, and you see what you come up with. So again, entertainment purpose only, please no wagering. It's just to me, it's a guidepost.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you guys what you've thought about other reactions in the industry. I mean, were you expecting this much? I think we were. We were expecting kind of this much buzz around it, but just some general thoughts when other people started reacting to the first month of data.
Well, I will tell you that we are the ratings experts. We're kind of data geeks, so we kind of wanted to just the facts man kind of this, right? What are the facts that we're seeing? I'm not going to mention names, but some people out there were looking for headlines and clicks, and hot takes get headlines and clicks. We weren't looking for a hot take. We were looking for what happened.
We're looking for a hot topic.
I saw one analysis where they were talking about how everything increased, but then when you read the fine print, they used the top 5 stations in the market. Well, the top 5 stations in the market, by definition, have to have strong ratings, not necessarily everyone increasing, but they would be more likely to increase than have a big decrease. Right. So by averaging just the top 5 stations, what kind of a picture are you really showing people? Again, this is 4,400 radio stations across 48 markets. So we're hoping that things like the Christmas change from holiday to January, it comes out in the wash because we have a lot of stations in here to average that out.
Right, and you're dealing with demos. So if we were just looking, for example, AC radio from holiday to Christmas, they'd all be down, right? I mean, that's just the natural course of events. Also, I've seen some stuff out there where they were comparing share increases year over year. Share's not the story, and so this. And I think one of them was some format went up from a 3.4 to a 3.9%. Not exactly a quantum leap. You have to look at the things that drive share, and again, if it's all based on market pump, right? And if you're not pacing the market, then your share goes down.
And at an individual level, share is almost the most important thing,
right?
Because if your AQH was up 20%, but PUM was up 25%, well, you didn't keep up with the market.
Right.
So your share actually went down. So looking at that on an individual level makes sense, but averaging it might not paint the kind of picture that we're trying to do here with 4,400 stations.
Yeah, I mean again, AQH, CUM, TSL, they all play into share, but what did those components do? What really drove it? I mean, I will tell you, I was surprised with the data that how high average quarter-hour persons increased on a percentage basis compared to TSL. I expect TSL to be far and away the percentage leader, and it wasn't. That kind of surprised me.
Yeah, I think it was surprising too.
I mean, that's definitely what the data showed. There's no question. Yeah.
It's there, But again, we're also, your mileage may vary. Look at your own situation, right? Because we're talking about taking 4,400 radio stations and their percentage increase in AQH person across these day parts and demos, adding them together and dividing by 4,400, right? So, the percentage gives you a picture, but it doesn't necessarily tell you the whole story, I don't think.
Right, and in individual stations ratings, the denominator is smaller than market total.
Right.
So therefore, the percent change is going to be higher because it's got a smaller denominator. Yeah. Again, that part's just the math.
So eventually...
At the end of the day, though, I mean, again, I think I said it earlier, this is a positive for radio.
Right. It's a good story for radio overall.
Absolutely.
Even though every, market and every station has its own different story, overall, it's positive for the industry.
Yeah, I mean, for better or worse, this is our industry's currency.
Yep.
And there's a lot of listening going on. Nielsen told us that it was basically 25% of all the quarter hours out there had 3-minute and 4-minute entries that were being excluded before. And now they're being included. It was real listening. Now we're getting credit for it. That's a good thing.
I wanted to go back to something we were talking about before. I think when we were talking about the difference in cume and some of these smaller, obviously the listening occasions. Does listening in the car play into this at all? Like, what could this tell us about people who are listening in the car? Are more people listening in the car than, I mean, we always look at that for before and after the pandemic, but do we have any thoughts about that? How it could be related?
Well, we know it's the number one location. That's been pretty well demonstrated by share of ear and people like that. I mean, you raise an interesting point. What do people do in the car? Punch, 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 punch.
Mm-hmm.
So I
Switch,
mean,
flip,
yeah,
right.
it's hitting the buttons. So maybe it is showing, more shorter listen to, like you said, Mark, more shorter durations and more occasions. That could be the case.
And that wouldn't necessarily be specific to a demo, right? I mean, that could be, I mean, maybe it would be, but
It could, you know what? Interesting point, and we don't have the answer to that, but speculation-wise, it could be more to format, right?
all right.
If you're listening to spoken word, let's say, um, where it tends to be longer form and you're into it longer. Whereas, if you're listening to a music intensive morning show that they just played a song you didn't like, you hit a song you didn't like, or they got on a topic you didn't want. I mean, there's so many variables. I mean, there's
Formats. I'm actually most excited to see. I mean, I'm interested to see what that's going to look like when you guys dive into that, because I feel like that's a story that nobody's really talking about much, at least that I've seen. And I think you mentioned that too, Steve. You haven't seen anybody really diving into that at all.
well, Nielsen did that last year when they did the May to May comparison, and I thought it was kind of funny that they had that long. There was a long graph of every format, and I think the top format had gone up 29%, and the bottom format had gone up 24%, and that's not really much of a difference, guys. That's not huge. I mean, it'll be curious to see as we dive into it, or does CHR have the biggest benefit, or does it News Talk, or whatever?
And that specific example you mentioned will be really interesting because obviously there's the age difference between the two formats, but there's also the delivery difference, right? I mean, the News Talk station I listen to, they have very short segments with short stop sets. It's a totally different delivery than a CHR station that's going to have either mostly a bow tie clock with the stop sets at the 15 and 45 breaks.
Right, and the various types of news talks, right? Is it a talk station? Is it NPR, or is it a 1010 wins or a TOP? Some that kind of configuration.
Yeah. There's a lot going on here to think about. And as we mentioned, this is just the first month of data. We'll have more data, next month. Then we'll be at 2 months. And by the time we're in April, we'll be out. I can't believe it, guys. I'm thinking it's February. It's March, so we're getting close. We're almost in April. And then we'll have the 3 months worth of data to look at, which, to your point, as you guys are mentioning, we'll be able to more accurately make comparisons, apples to apples, right, instead of apples to oranges. So maybe
we'll never really have apples to apples because, again, the real apple to apple is the same month with 5 minutes and 3 minutes.
Right. We're closer, though. We'll be
There's
closer.
a lot of things that change from last January to this January. There's a lot of things that change from holiday to this January. And again, the only way there's no way to filter it out entirely, but there is a way to average it out by looking at a lot of different stations' data.
Yeah, exactly.
I think we've really put a lot of time and effort into this because we want to give you guys as much, insight as possible and as accurate as possible. We'll be coming back to this topic again, as we mentioned, when we'll be diving specifically into formats, but we'll be coming back next month when we have some more data to look at. So I think this was a great conversation. I want to thank you guys so much for coming on, and we want to encourage all of our listeners to engage with us through comments. If you have any questions that myself, Mark, or Steve could answer for you, or anything you want us to talk about more, please let us know. We're always open to that. Your thoughts and ideas, the good, the bad, the ugly, we'll take it all. So thank you, gentlemen, so much for coming on today. And until next time, we will sign off.